here today we are going to talk about how reliable is your business data. What do we mean by reliability of business data? Any piece of information and data that we get today, that we use as a source to make some informed decisions, those data we expect to be the truth, credible, reliable, trustworthy, dependable. If the decisions we take are not based on correct, complete data, how can the outcome that we expect to get be good? In today's day and age, where we are all living in a situation where it is most data or work is being done online, remotely. Data is being produced at a tremendous speed, but then it's much more important to know what is a good data, what is a bad data. This little cartoon actually kind of like exemplifies, well, we do what the data asks us to do, but we only have bad data. What do you mean? How do you define what is good or bad? What's the definition of a good data or a bad data? Good quality data or a bad quality data? We can see that the volume of data is exponentially been growing. And this is just not the enterprise data that we are producing every day in paper and transactions and all kind of structured and unstructured information. But there is also this wide world of unstructured social and other kind of data too. But then when we talk about data and we are talking about good data and a bad data, let's take a look at this picture here. Is the cup half empty or is it half full? Now, looking into that, different people who see this will visualize and perceive it differently. Now, if you are intending to make yourself a cup of hot tea or a hot coffee, where you need to actually blend it with hot water or something else, you would think maybe the half cup of milk is good enough. But then if you wanted a very warm, hot cup of cocoa on this wintry day, half cup is probably not going to leave you very satisfied. So what do we make of this? It means that everything has a context. It has a purpose. It depends on who is looking at the data and for what purpose they're looking at it. Now, we talk about data as a product. Now we talk about with customers, it has some value and a cost. So whether it is any line of business managers or owners, there is always certain amount of data that they would need to have. It has a value for them, but there is always a cost. In order to get the data from different sources or different systems, it must be captured, it must be curated, it has to be retained, and you need to trace it. So if you think of data as an asset, it must have also a necessary quality. Now we're going to talk in the next half an hour or so is about what is this data quality? It is a very subjective term. What does it depend on? And we've already said two of it. We said it is the purpose, the context for which you are using the data, and who, the user. So what data is being used by whom? But then there is the last interesting thing that we now also introduce here, time. Is the data that you are looking at have the same relevance or importance or impact at every point of time? Or is there some kind of correlation between when you're looking at what data for what purpose? Let's take a racing or a racehorse example. So bookkeepers and people who want to bet on the winning horse, they're probably looking up at the statistics. The information about that is relevant for them at that point when they want to actually make the bet. The same information may not be relevant later on. So everything is contextual. If you take your business data, your point of sales data, inventory data, your customer data, your products and goods data, all of them are different kinds of data. They are created and captured in different applications and systems. You have different targeted business groups who would be using combinations of these data, but for different purposes. Now let's take a look at a few typical use case scenarios. Let's assume that we take an example of a products manufacturing or a retail industry. We have different kinds of business personas. Anders is a business analyst. His job is to be able to collate the data and make reports, which are like forecasts, budgets, financial reports, sales figures. Depending on this, the stakeholders and the board of directors, they're expecting to make a plan for the next fiscal year. They want to make the quarterly forecast. They want to be able to know which line of new products will they invest in further, or which geographic industry they will actually go further on. So the kind of reports and analytics that Anders does is very important. He needs the data like the sales, the products, the market areas. Now let's look at Johan. He's an operational manager in the same company. His job is to make sure that he can manage the logistics, the suppliers, goods are coming, the parcels are coming. He needs to get them to be offloaded, put in the right place. If there are perishable goods, they need to go into the refrigerator. He has a finite amount of space in his warehouse, which means that he needs to be on top of the information. How much space and empty space is there? What has been, how many personnel that he needs in order to get the offloading done, and so forth. So as you can see here, he is very much hands-on and very people process oriented. Rebecca, on the other hand, she works in the marketing. Her job is to try and analyze the sales figures, pretty much like Anders does, but she has a different angle on it. She wants to know who her customers are, what kind of demographics and profiles they are on, and how can she make improved sales and marketing campaigns based on who is buying what kind of goods in which kind of demographic. In all of these cases, they're all working in the same industry, same company, even the data sources which are creating the data are still the same. However, the way which part of the data each one of them needs, and even if it's the same data, how they use it is different. Now let's take off into a different area. We are looking into the gaming industry. Now, in these days, I think most people are socializing online, so the gaming industry is really one of a very big, large industry now. You connect a lot of people globally and geographically distributed. They know each other by screen nicknames and other things, but they are sharing information and data. They need to know about characteristics and aspects, but they need to know it very real time and at the time at which they are playing. Sandra, on the other hand, she's a food special blogging. She writes about the food cuisines and reviews and articles. Her life is on sharing and social media and trying to interact with other fellow bloggers. Now, they are working with similar kind of data as well, right? All of them have to have data quality, which are characteristics. We even have international standards, and what I have here is an ISO 25012. It talks about data quality model, how you would put mostly for structured data in an informed computer system. If you take further look into it, you will see that the standards specify different data quality dimensions like accuracy, accessibility, recoverability. The things on the inner circle, those are the broad categories. And when we talk about accuracy, how accurate is your data, you can actually further subdivide it to precision, currentness, credibility, traceability, and so forth. And so for appropriateness, that's basically the fit for purpose that we've been talking about. The data has to fit the purpose you're looking for. That's your appropriateness. So in order to be appropriate for a particular use, it needs to be complete, needs to be understandable, consistent, and adequate. We can take a look at different definition details for these. Like as I mentioned about correctness and completeness. Currentness, is it relevant? It has to be the data of today, like what is happening now, how many vacancies are left in the warehouse. Is it consistent? If I get the same product from different stores, does it still have the same product code in different irrespective of which source that I'm getting it from? So it has to be consistent. Further moving on, so as I was already talking a few of these before, the data needs to be accessible. It should be available whenever you want it. It can't be that, it doesn't keep business hours, saying that, I can get it only when I'm between 8 and 5 in the evening. It should be portable, like it should not be constrained to a particular platform, an application, an operating system. So you should be able to not only access it, but you should be able to move it. If you look at a very simplistic example, when we are talking about these attributes and different things, hey, this is a customer data. So obviously you have an identifier, you have names and last names, date of birth, address, location, phone numbers. Now, as you can see here, while it is all data, we have, sorry about that, the date of birth has different formats, so it's not being very consistent. So you're having the same piece of data, but it has inconsistent representation. You may have other things like email addresses. It is incomplete because you have nulls or blanks in it. So these are what we are typically mean when it comes to data quality. Sometimes a missing email address, say for example, Anders in our use case, if he is interested in making sales prognosis and things, he probably isn't concerned about the missing email address for a particular customer because that is not the data that he is looking at. But to Rebecca, who is interested in sending out marketing campaigns to the customers, not having reliable, complete email information is a big blow to her because she needs to contact the customers. Again, coming back to what we have been talking about, the fit for purpose and the audience. So let's go back to our different use cases and see what kind of aspects have characteristics of data quality is more relevant. Now, all the aspects of data quality are relevant for any data, but depending on the user's needs, certain characteristics are more key than the others. In the case of Anders, of course, he needs, if he wants to do a sales figure and a financial report, every single sales order invoice has to be there. They need to be consistent. You should have the consistent data format, structure, so that he can add them together. It should be credible. He needs to have the faith that the data from the invoicing system and point of sales is not manipulated, edited, corrupted between that system until it reaches to him. Now, if we look at Johan and we remember him, he is the operational manager. So he needs to know the currentness. He needs to know the status on the hour and how much shipment is coming in, how much parcels have been offloaded, where in his big warehouse does he have space, how many people are going to be available to uh, do the necessary tasks. So the data needs to be current, it needs to be available, it needs to be obviously something that he can rely on. And what about Rebecca? She obviously needs the correctness and credibility that we talked about. And if she's looking at customers, the currentness of the customers. So a customer, if they have moved houses on states and the information is not updated, then she's probably reaching out to the wrong people. So currentness of the data, the latest current version is very important. And in her case, understandability. She needs not back-end computer codes and gizmos, but the information in a more meaningful presentation, understandable way. Now, what about our gaming community? They are just gaming. Do they not require data quality? Well, they do. They need the latest information. They need to be able to port it across multiple devices, different applications. They too need to be able to understand. And what about Sandra? She has to have the correct information. She needs to have the completeness. Now, in her case for blogs, we are probably referring more to the metadata and tags that she puts onto it. So, we talked so far about the fit for purpose. The right user should be able to get the right data. The data should match their expectations and what they're expecting, that these information should be there, so it should be there, right? But now let's talk about how do you ensure within an enterprise that we have reliable data. So let me introduce to you a data quality framework. 8 steps that you need to do. They are not necessarily in a kind of a linear stepwise progression. Some of you may have to do a few, some of you may have to do a more. It depends upon where in the life cycle of data management you are in and what are your needs and what are your aspirations. We will come back to that in a little while. If we talk about data quality framework, so you need to know the stakeholders, what kind of data quality measurements, how good or bad is your data, what kind of policies govern and structure your data, procedures and governing bodies, standards, monitoring and training. Let me put this in a different context for you. We all love to eat food and we probably are chefs in small or big way. So assume that you are going to plan for a Christmas dinner for your family. So you know that you want to have a good get together. The first step of it, you know your stakeholders. So you need to know, right, who am I going to cook for? My family. How many members are there? What are their tastes like? What kind of cuisine do they feel like? Do they feel like hot, spicy food or sweet desserts? Do they prefer Indian, Chinese, Greek? So knowing the expectation of what to do, its expected outcome, the purpose, and then the parameters is the starting point. So basically, if we were going back to our identify your needs, figure out which aspects of the data quality is relevant. So as I said, for Rebecca, the email address is contact information of the customer is relevant. For Anders, the actual, maybe it's good enough if he just gets a customer ID and what's the value of goods the person has purchased over last 1 month. So it's important on how much has the customer spent. Then about also to see where are you today? So if this is your expectation. Are you able to do the work today? If yes, how are you doing it? Where is the data that you are getting it from? You need to be able to have mechanisms to take a chart about what's the current status. So coming back, we are planning our Christmas dinner. So we know what our family would like to eat, what kind of cuisine and how many people. So we know that. Then we need to know something else. Kind of like we need to know what's our budget. Do we have any kind of guidelines like, so are we going to spend 500 kronas or 1,000 kronas for the meal? Does anybody have allergies? Does anybody have preferences like chicken, fish, or vegetarian? So likewise, when it comes to data management and data quality, we need enterprise level policies. We need the guidelines to be set in place to know that this is kind of like what we can do. Do we store 3 years of data? Do we store 7 years of data? Do we have GDPR specific rules which tells us that we may or may not store certain customer information? So those kind of policies, the framework, the outer boxes, the kind of the guidelines within which our entire data management principle is supposed to work. So now we back to our dinner planning. We know what kind of cuisine. We know our budget. So we have some ideas about that. Right, then what do I need next? So we know what we're going to cook. I need some recipes. I need to know, so if I'm going to cook a turkey and everything, I need to look up some recipes. I need a dessert and I'm going to bake a cake. I need a cake recipe. So I need to look up some recipes, so procedures. I need to know how to do this thing. Likewise, like for any other data management process, even for data quality, we have different defined procedures. You need to have standardized data inspection templates to know that, okay, we are periodically once every 3 months, once every 6 months, we do data inspections. We check on the operational data quality issues, making sure that your data is current and updated. Operational data, when you notice like delivery time windows and everything, how frequently is it supposed to be updated? Did I miss getting the update in the last half an hour or the last 1 day? Why did that happen? Was there a break in the data communication flow? So when you're going more and more towards operational, you need to have more stringent procedures for ensuring that any kind of break, stop, flaws in the data procedures is addressed and taken care of. From contingency planning, you need to know what happens, exception handling, which is very important. So like a good recipe, you need to know the how to do this thing. So we know the recipe, we know how to do the things. We will need to know the measurements. If you're going to make a pancake, ingredients are the same like flour, egg, milk, but depending on the different recipes, it depends whether you're going to make a pancake or a cupcake or something else. But then what is more important is the measurements, like what volume and quantity of different ingredients do you need? How long do you bake it for? How long do you cook it for? So same way for data quality measurements, we need to know, always keep in touch back with your stakeholders. What business data did they want? How often did they want? Is it good enough? And you need to always keep checking it, not once, not twice, but as a continuous life cycle. When you see that, okay, what is an acceptable threshold? Well, at least 70% of my customer list have their emails. Okay, it could be better. So you make a drive to get to contact people, get in the email address. Now it becomes 90%. Rebecca is very happy. We have a good data quality, so that's an acceptable level. 2-3 months go ahead, we have new customers coming in, some customers leaving, And now suddenly you again run a check. You see now it's come down to 50% because new customers have not signed up their email address. So the measurements, the quality is not something that you do once and forget. It's not something that you set it up and that you can assume it will be maintained and staying the same way. You need to keep measuring it. You always measure it with respect to something that you have either as a target or your baseline. And also, again, I reiterate, the same data for a different use case may have a completely different measurements and metrics. We talked about measurements, and as I mentioned, it's not something that you do once and you forget it. You also need to keep monitoring it. So if your cake is in the oven and you know that you need to, the recipe might say that you need to cook it for say 1 hour, 30 minutes at 150 degrees centigrade. So you know what the measurements are, you know the recipe, but you need to monitor it. You would actually keep going and checking on the turkey periodically, adjusting it, tweaking it. You do that instinctively because you know that every oven is different. And while a recipe and a measurement is just a guideline, every cook and chef have their own touch to it. How do you want it? That's why you monitor it. Same thing you need to do with your data quality. You have agreed on the acceptable levels, but you need to keep monitoring it. Measure and monitor. Go hand in hand. Now, we were talking about recipes. And imagine what would happen if you switched a teaspoon with a cup, a liter with a milliliter. In the units of measurements get jumbled up, you're in trouble. So whenever someone says it is 10 degrees outside, so 10 degrees centigrade, 10 degrees Fahrenheit, it makes a difference. And if you were going to refer to the fruits and classification, you have standards for it. You know, when you say a banana, you know what is a banana. It's the same for everyone. If you talk about ISO country codes, that's an international standard. SE standing for Sweden, and so forth. So why standards? Because having standards and following a standard is like having grammar and vocabulary in a language. You want to ensure that it is interpreted and understood by different users in the same way. You have data, which is pieces of small entities of information, but it becomes an information only when it is put into context and it conveys an important. And wherever possible, we always say use the reference data or standards so that it can become portable, it can be consistent, it can be understood. In different industries, you have different standards. In healthcare, you have nomenclatures like SNOMED and ICD-10. Similarly, for products, you do have UNSPC and CPV, Common Procurement Vocabulary, and other things. But at the very least, almost all of us would be using standards for date, time, countries, currencies. Right. Now, we go to something very important. All of these things that we talked about so far, we could say that we can specify what it is and how to do it. And you can measure the success, how far are you gone along in the process. If you are cooking something, you can, well, I've been cooking for 30 minutes and I have approximately 50 more minutes of cooking time left, and so forth. But now let's look at the governance part of it. This is the glue that brings everything together. It is invisible, but it is also essential. Now, if you are doing this planning and cooking of our Christmas dinner, we have the checkpoints. Have we done all the gathering of the recipes? Have we looked at the recipes and figured out the ingredients? Have we got the ingredients? Are they all set right? Do we have all the kitchen equipments? Are we starting? Who is going? Then you would portion out who is going to do which kind of prep and who's going to do the cleanup. So you have division of responsibilities. Now, similarly, for data governance, you need to know which data. We've said we had talked about the stakeholders. From where do you need it? How often do you need it? What aspects are important? So you need to have who's the data owner. Usually it's going to be from the business because it's the business who take ownership of the data. A data steward who can be responsible to curate and nurture it and make sure that the data owner is getting the data that they need. A data steward could, in many cases, be from an IT organization. A data analyst, someone who is, or a data architect who looks into the data, make sure that you're able to get your measurements and monitoring. They're looking more into the content. And of course, last but not the least, the IT administrator. We talked about the tooling and process to people process technology. There is always a little bit of the technology, even if it is 20% of the whole big puzzle. So the governance models is the organization that brings together and defines all these policies, procedures, and monitoring metrics and everything that we talked about so far. So, data governance, as I said, people, process, technology. It is the heart of your data strategy. And what is a data strategy? For your corporate, your data strategy starts with your vision, with your identification of which data is essential to your core business, and which are the non-peripheral information. How much emphasis are you going to put on each pieces of data, making sure things like data lineage, data curation, data retentions, data quality is actually realized. But let's now look, as I said, people processes, very much human oriented. Data quality is also very subjective. It will also change over time. You're dependent on people who are either in the process of creating the data, curating the data, analyzing the data. There is a lot of human involvement. Data stewards who are actually validating and making specifically for master data management, match merge decisions. So everything needs to be training, periodic guidelines, refreshers, so that everyone is actually going to be doing it again in a consistent way. Well, if you want to be a good chef, you know what they say, practice makes it perfect. If the first time you attempt a recipe, it doesn't turn out the best, don't give up. You need to do it again. And then you would, over time, every one of us starts adding our own touches. And then you will have your own family secret sauce for your Christmas. So when we talked about it, we actually did a webinar and we have done a survey as well. And most of the respondents, when we asked them that, okay, we have all these different aspects and stages, not every stage is important and relevant to every organization. So we did a quick poll about seeing which are the kind of the focus areas for their companies, what they foresaw it. And interestingly, as we talked about, data governance comes up at the first spot, because if you can't have the business orient focused data governance in place, and then the policies and the stakeholders, those three things, if you have in place, then you will be able to define and do the how you do the data quality, data cleansing, and making sure the data is correct. That's the easy part. So how can Enfo help you? So we help our customers in different aspects of data management. We can obviously, of course, help you with the platforms, technologies, and tools. We can, without a doubt, help you with your data strategy, setting up your data governance principles, the processes, identifying the roles, responsibilities, and how can we do that? So we have a lot of checklists and models based on standards like the ISO standard I showed you or the DAMA standard. So you can start with the data quality assessment. So knowing out kind of a little bit of a scorecard baselining of where your different data sources for your different business context is. You could have it at different maturity levels. We have a plan for how you would be able to do a short project for doing a data quality assessment. Then obviously helping you with the people process technology. Once we have identified uh, where you are very good at, where you might have some gaps for improvement, and then give you recommendations based on that. Of course, in all of these process to do this, we come with little cheat sheets and toolkits, so which helps us questionnaires and filling up things to help you on the journey. We would also strongly recommend that we have other webinars and white papers that we have published. So you can find these in these links. Please do go ahead and download and feel free. You can contact us through our website as well. Hope you enjoyed this session today. Thank you and have a good day.